Statement 1 given is a differential inverted U-tube manometer determines the difference in pressure between 2 points in a flow section to which it is connected. So we'll see that statement is correct or not. Statement 2 given is the sensitivity of an inclined gauge depends on the angle of inclination. Now these two statements are given and 4 options are given as both statement 1 and 2 are correct and statement 2 is correct explanation to 1. Statement 1 and 2 are correct and statement 2 is not correct explanation to 1. Option C is statement 1 is correct, 2 is false, and option D is statement 2 is correct, statement 1 is false. Now, for such questions, you must remember that all the statements should be read very carefully. Now, after reading the statement, you should choose whether it is correct explanation or not. Now, option 1, a differential inverted U-tube manometer determines the difference in pressure between 2 points in a flow section to which it is connected. I will draw one kind of differential manometer. It is rough sketch for any differential manometer. If it is A, it is limb B. Here some fluid is flowing or some gas is there. Here again any fluid B is flowing. So here pressure will be PA, pressure will be PB. To measure, we have one different fluid. Usually it is mercury, or it should be some lighter fluid also. So if we are using mercury, then there will be a problem that the fluid here will be of lesser density and it would not be able to create proper pressure. So we use some fluid of lesser density. Let us say it is density 1, here some density will be there, here some density will be there, but it will be utilized to measure PA minus PB. This is what is asked in our question. So yes, differential inverted tube manometer is used for pressure difference measurement. Statement 2 given as sensitivity of any inclined gauge depends on angle of inclination. Now we'll see what sensitivity term is. For any inclined, sensitivity for any inclined pressure gauge is inversely proportional to sin theta. It is angle of the inclined limb. So yes, sensitivity depends on angle, so it is again correct, but the statement 2 and statement 1 are having no relation with them. So statement 2 is individual different statement, statement 1 is individually different statement. So option will be B, where statement 1 and 2 both are correct, but statement 2 is not an explanation for statement 1. Statement 1 given is when flow is unsteady, both normal and tangential component of acceleration will occur. Statement 2 given is during unsteady flow, in addition to change in velocity along the path, velocity will also change with time. Okay, so 4 options are given. Both statement 1 and 2 are individually true. Statement 2 is correct explanation. Option B, both statement 1 and 2 are individually true. Statement 2 is not correct explanation of 1. C, statement 1 is true, statement 2 is false, and D, of statement 1 is false, statement 2 is true. When flow is unsteady, that means the velocity is function of time. So when we call any flow to be unsteady, if there is any flow happening in the pipe, if flow is unsteady, if at t equal to t1 velocity is v1, after some time when time is t2 velocity becomes t2, when time is t3 velocity becomes v3. That means with respect to time at a particular instant there is change in velocity, so there will be acceleration. It is true, there will be acceleration. But since it is unsteady only, it is not mentioned that the flow is curvy. Okay, if the flow is in a curve, then there will be acceleration in two directions. First, acceleration in the direction of flow, and there will be one acceleration in normal direction or radial direction. This radial direction acceleration is required to change direction, and this flow direction acceleration is required to change magnitude of the speed. So there will be accelerations. Yes, it is true. So when flow is unsteady, both normal and tangential component of acceleration will occur. No, normal acceleration will not be there until curvy motion is mentioned. So here in statement 1, it is not given that motion is happening in a curve. So statement 1 does not look correct to me. Why? Because it is mentioned only unsteady, it is not curvy. Statement 2 given is, during unsteady flow, in addition to the change of flow along the path, the velocity will also change with time. So statement 2 is correct. Statement 2 is what? Definition of unsteady flow. So statement 2 is correct, but statement 1 is false. That means I have got my answer, that option D will be true. My answer will be option D, which suggests statement 1 is false, statement 2 is true. Statement 1 given is, there exists a positive pressure difference between the inlet and throat of venturimeter. Statement 2 given is, the coefficient of discharge of a venturimeter accounts for the non-uniformity of flow at both inlet as well as throat. 4 options are given, and among these options we have to choose the correct one. Now statement 1 given is, there exists a positive pressure difference between inlet and throat of venturimeter. Let us draw one venturimeter. Okay. This is how any venturimeter looks like. The diameter again here will be same. Okay. It is inlet, so it is my inlet, and this minimum diameter is known as throat. Here if velocity is v1 and here if velocity is v2, as we know, a1 into v1 will be equal to a2 into v2. Due to this velocity, we can see that area 1 is larger, so velocity 1 is less than velocity 2. This is what a venturimeter works for. Velocity is increased. Due to this increase in velocity, according to, it is due to continuity equation. According to Bernoulli's equation, we know as velocity increases, pressure decreases. So here pressure P2 will be less than P1. And in the statement 1 it is given that there is a positive pressure difference between inlet and throat. So P1 minus P2 should be positive. This is what statement 1 suggests us. And do we have P1 greater? Yes, P1 is greater than P2, so statement 1 is correct. Now statement 2 given is, the coefficient of discharge of a venturimeter accounts for the non-uniformity of flow at both inlet and outlet. So statement 2 is, we have coefficient of discharge and it accounts for non-uniformity in flow. What is coefficient of discharge? It is actual flow rate it is actual flow rate to theoretical flow rate. Okay, coefficient of discharge comes into picture wherever there are losses happening. So whenever there are losses, energy losses happen, some head loss is there, some turbulence is there. Due to these losses, this coefficient of friction, coefficient of discharge come into picture. The coefficient of discharge of venturimeter accounts for non-uniformity of flow. It is incorrect because we already know that the flow is non-uniform. At this location velocity is v1, at this location velocity is v2. We have made our device to work in non-uniform flow. But coefficient of discharge is not dealing with this v1, v2 terms, because this v1, v2 are the terms through which we are calculating theoretical flow rate. But the actual flow rate is different than theoretical because of some vortex formation here. We keep the angle, this expansion angle and contraction angle, these two angles play very important role for this actual flow rate. So there are so many things attached to this actual flow rate. There are so many losses happening which are being accounted in this coefficient of discharge. So statement 2 given is wrong. So our option will be C, which suggests statement 1 is true and statement 2 is false. Statement 1 given is non-viscous flow between two plates held parallel with a very small spacing between them is an example of irrotational flow. Statement 2 is forced vortex implies irrotational flow. Now we need to select which of the following option is correct. 4 options are given. As I can see, statement 2 is incorrect. Statement 1 and statement 2 I am having. I know that statement 2 is incorrect. Force vortex motion generally it implies irrotational motion. So rotational motion. So for forced vortex, it is always rotational. What a rotational motion looks like? If some particle is, it is fluid particle. If fluid particle is in orientation 1, 2, 3, 4 here, after moving to certain distance, its orientation changes. So whenever orientation of fluid changes, the fluid is known as going into rotational motion. In forced vortex, such rotation is happening, so statement 2 is incorrect. Statement 1, non-viscous flow between two plates held parallel with very small spacing between them is an example of irrotational flow. Yes, it is one of the assumption only, and since it is non-viscous, the flow is given as non-viscous, that is the main reason why the flow is irrotational in nature. So our answer becomes statement 1 correct, statement 2 is false. So our final answer will be option C, which suggests statement 1 is true and statement 2 is false. Statement 1 given is, in a pipeline the nature of fluid flow depends entirely on velocity. Statement 2 given is, Reynolds number of flow depends on velocity, the diameter of pipe and kinematic viscosity of the fluid. We need to choose among the given options which of the option is suitable for our question. Statement 1 given is, in a pipeline the nature of fluid flow depends entirely on velocity. Whenever you see such words, entirely, mainly, only, you need to look at this statement again. As we know, for any pipe flow, whether the flow is laminar or turbulent, we need to look for Reynolds number, and this Reynolds number is rho Vd by mu, where rho is density, V is velocity, D is diameter and mu is dynamic viscosity. Now the statement 1 is, in a pipeline the nature of flow depends entirely on velocity. It is wrong. Even if velocity is fixed, I change diameter, the Reynolds number will change. I change the density, Reynolds number will change. I change viscosity, Reynolds number will change. So even velocity is not changing, but by changing the other parameters, flow can be changed to laminar or to turbulent, or it can become transition flow also. So statement 1 is wrong. Statement 2 given is Reynolds number of the flow depends on velocity, the diameter of the pipe and kinematic viscosity of fluid. It is correct. Now here kinematic viscosity is not written. As we know, kinematic viscosity is mu by rho. So we have this term. So formula will be Vd by nu. It is again method to write Reynolds number. So Reynolds number is velocity, diameter and kinematic viscosity dependent term. So statement 2 is correct. Our answer will be statement 1 is false and statement 2 is correct. That option is D. Statement 1 given as if a boat built with sheet metal on wooden frame has an average density which is greater than that of water, then the boat can float in water with its hollow face upward but will sink when it overturns. Statement 2, buoyant forces always acts in upward direction. Statement 2 is correct. We'll go with statement 1 first. We'll check whether it is correct or not. Statement 1, if there is a boat, the material used in boat is wood and sheet metal. And the net density is greater than density of water. That suggests that the boat should sink. But whenever we put this boat in such a way that its hollow part is upward, the buoyant force formula is rho into volume displaced into G and rho of water. And if this force is force of mg of boat, that is equal to rho into volume of boat material. Okay, so volume of material only. So material and rho of material into G. So if buoyant force is greater than this mg or buoyant force is equal to this mg, then boat can float in water. As we know, if hollow part is upward, this displaced volume will be volume of material plus volume of air. So total volume is increased from material. If this increment, if the air is in such a volume that this buoyant force becomes equal to mg, which is possible, and usually this is the only reason why boat can float. So boat will float. That is correct. So statement first is partial correct till now. If hollow face is upward, boat can float. But if I put this boat in such a way that there is no air present in the hollow part because boat is right now overturned. Now this air volume is not there. We know that material volume is less than, material volume is not enough to bring FB equal to mg. And as we know, this volume is not enough because the density here is lower and density here is higher, so mg will be more. Force mg will be more than force buoyant. Why? Because here material density is there, volume of material and G, and here density, volume of material and G. These both quantities are same, but as we know that it is true that material density is greater than density of water, that means the mg force, the gravitational force will be more than buoyant force. So statement 1 is correct, sorry. Statement 1 gives right. It says that the boat can float if hollow face is upward, boat will sink if it overturns. And statement 2, which suggests that buoyant force always act upward, it is also true, but this only upward direction is not helping out the statement 1. Statement 1 is true because when hollow phase was upward direction, there was one more volume added, that was volume of air to the displaced volume. Now the displaced volume in second case has become the material volume only because there is no air. So material volume is same, G is same, so density will play a major role, and if density is more, the boat will sink. So statement 1 is true, statement 2 is true, but not explanation, so our answer will be option number B. Statement for the question given is a 150 mm diameter shaft rotates at 1500 rpm within a 200 mm long journal bearing with 150.5 mm internal diameter. The uniform annular space between the shaft and bearing is filled with oil of dynamic viscosity 0.08 poise. The shear stress on the shaft will be. You are asked to find shear stress tau, and as we know, shear stress with help of viscosity can be found as viscosity multiplied by velocity gradient. Now in our problem, in any journal bearing, there will be one journal in which shaft is rotating, and for our case we are given that the shaft is rotating and there is thickness of this oil. This thickness is nothing but dy, so we can write it as dy. Now the fluid over here will be at rest. The fluid will be here, will be at velocity, and that velocity will be decided by speed of this shaft, and this speed can be written as omega into r. So variation can be written as omega r minus 0 if I am assuming linear variation to be there. Now the shear stress will be equal to mu, value of mu is 0.08 multiplied by du, that is omega into r, divided by dy, thickness. This is what I need to find. The diameters are given, shaft diameter 150 mm, the diameter of shaft is 150. So radius can be written as 75 mm. And with this journal bearing dia, internal dia is given as 150.5. So diameter of journal is 150.5. So the difference will be 2 times of t. So it will be 0.5 divided by 2. So it is thickness, it is in mm. So it is thickness which is to be used as dy, so I can write it as dy also. Now I have thickness with me. If omega is known to me, my formula will get completed. As we know, n is given as 1500 rpm. So omega will be equal to 1500 into 2 pi by 60 radian per second. So here in tau formula I can write as 0.08, this is what mu value given, into 1500 into 2 pi by 60, this is omega. Value of r is 75, so 75 divided by 1000 divided by thickness, and thickness is given as 0.5 divided by 2 into 10 power minus 3, and this will be Newton per meter square. After solving this term, you will get value of tau to be 3768.01 Newton per meter square or Pascal. So is there any option? The options are in kilonewton per meter square, so I can write it as 3.76 kilonewton per meter square. After solving, my final answer can be 3.77 kilonewton per meter square. So my answer I can write as 3.77 kilonewton per meter square. That is option number C. The shear stress tau naught for steady fully developed flow inside a uniform horizontal pipe with coefficient of friction F, density rho and velocity V is given by. 4 options are given. Very important term here is coefficient of friction F. It is not friction factor, it is coefficient of friction. So we have a relation of coefficient of friction with friction factor as, if it is my friction factor, then it should be 4 times of coefficient of friction. This is what I should remember. In this question, coefficient of friction is given as F, so I am writing it as coefficient of friction, and it is my friction factor. If you are not aware with this particular fact, there will be some problem in this question. Now, we'll start how to find shear stress for any pipe if I assume any cylindrical particle or cylindrical water section. Then in this water section there will be some pressure difference due to which it is moving. So this pressure difference will be acting towards area A, and on the wall of this liquid there will be shear stress acting, and it is in equilibrium right now, so I can write as delta P multiplied by area A is equal to tau into the surface area. So area surface. Delta P into area can be written as pi r square. If radius is r, then it can be written as tau into as, that will be 2 pi r multiplied by L length. From here this pi get cancelled, this r is cancelled, so my tau term will be equal to delta P dot r by 2L. This is what my delta tau term looks like. Now, but not a single option is in the form of this, but I know how to calculate delta P. Delta P, loss in pressure, will be equal to rho g into head loss due to friction. So rho g into FL V square divided by 2g d. This is what my formula looks like. Now from here g and g got cancelled, so I have got delta P equal to, this is F, friction factor, so FF I am writing. So rho into FFL V square upon 2d can be written as 4r. If I replace this delta P term here, I will be getting tau is equal to rho into FF multiplied by L into V square dot R divided by 2L into 4R. From here R and R will get cancelled and L and L will get cancelled, and as we know friction factor is 4 times coefficient of friction, so tau will be equal to rho into 4 times F into V square divided by 8. So from 4 8 can be cancelled, so final answer will be equal to rho F V square divided by 2. So rho F V square by 2, option number A. So our final answer should be option number A. We have used the terms which we are using frequently, like this stress term we do not use frequently. So the term which is used is this. We do not use friction factor in shear stress term. Not so many questions are asked, but this factor is very frequently used. So with help of these two things we have come to our answer. So our answer is A. The total energy of each particle at various places in case of perfect incompressible fluid flowing in continuous stream. A keeps on increasing, B keeps on decreasing, C remains constant, D may increase or decrease. Now the total energy, if we consider any flow, continuous flow is there. In this flow there is constant friction loss. Friction losses will be there. Due to this friction loss, whatever energy is in the flow, E2 will be less than E1. Hence, the energy is decreasing in the direction of flow. So we can go with option B, that suggests that energy keeps on decreasing with flow. Option B is the answer. The normal stresses within an isotropic Newtonian fluid are related to: first, pressure; second, viscosity of fluid; third, velocity gradient. Which of the above are correct? Now you need to find which of the following three is directly related to the normal stresses in any Newtonian fluid. As we know that for any Newtonian fluid, if stresses are to be defined with help of several equations in Navier-Stokes equation also, we can write this stress in any particular orientation x will be equal to minus p 2 mu del Ex by del x minus 2 mu by 3. There will be pressure gradient terms. Del y, it is x, y, del Vz upon del z. Here we can see it depends on pressure, it depends on viscosity, as well as it depends on velocity gradient. Since all the three, 1, 2 and 3 are appearing in this formula, we can put our answer to be 1, 2 and 3 all correct. So answer will be option D, which suggests all 1, 2 and 3 statements are correct. The necessary and sufficient condition for bodies in flotation to be in stable equilibrium is that the center of gravity is located below: A, metacenter; B, center of buoyancy; C, epicenter; and D, centroid. Now, for floating bodies, we have one rule: if metacenter, center of gravity and center of buoyancy, if it is the case with floating bodies, the body is stable. So for our case, the answer should be center of gravity located below metacenter. M is metacenter. We can understand this concept by one example also. Assume I am having some random body. For this, center of gravity is here. Here it is center of buoyancy, and there will be metacenter at some point this. Now what will happen when we tilt this body? If we have tilt this body, then on tilting, the buoyancy point will reach somewhat over here. Center of gravity is still here only, and as defined, the line joining these two will form some metacenter. If we have tilted this body in this particular direction, then due to buoyancy there won't be any torque. So torque due to buoyancy is 0, because about metacenter the torque is 0 because force line is passing through metacenter. But torque due to gravity is in opposite direction. So as we try, it is external, then it is restoring. So restoring torque can be applied if such arrangement is there: metacenter, then center of gravity, then center of buoyancy. So our answer should be option A. Gravity should be below metacenter.